Serious. Redditors, what is your scary paranormal ghost stories? My niece, only a year younger than me. I'm a late life child, was fond of doing seances with her friend. I was not fond of her doing seances. She always complained that she wasn't able to communicate with spirits, and I politely asked her to stop multiple times. She didn't. One night, I'm fast asleep and having an awful dream about being followed by some unknown entity. When it touched me in my dream, my eyes shot open, and I felt a cold whisper in my ear and something scratching my back. I had no idea what it said, I just remember it being guttural. I was paralyzed. My CD player turned itself on. I had my Flogging Molly CD in one of the trays inside. It was a boombox that could hold 5 CDs, and it skipped and repeated the lyrics, "You're on the devil's dance floor" twice and then shut off. I could move right after and grabbed my cross. I'm not religious, but it offered comfort. In hindsight, it was made of silver, and I then went into the bathroom. I tried to rationalize it by saying, "Oh, it's just sleep paralysis," to calm myself down. There was no way something like that happened. But when I lifted the back of my shirt, I had 4 welts across my back. I grew up in a suburban neighborhood in a subdivision built in the 1970s. We moved into the house in 2000. There was no real history to the land. It was just kind of like empty unused land prior to construction, so I had no reason to believe my house was haunted. Ever. As a brief background about the situation, I had seen spirits since I was about 8 years old. And sometimes they were kind of scary, but I got pretty used to it. Over time, I kind of figured out that my house was built on top of I'm not sure if portal is the right term. It was more like a bunch of roads met up there so spirits would come in and then go out along another road. For the most part, spirits didn't stick around more than a few hours. Occasionally one of them might come up to me, tell me perhaps how they died, told me things like, "If you ever see this person, let them know I'm looking for them," etc. And it kept pretty tame. This went on for years, sometimes more creepy stuff would crawl through. I usually just called them shadows. I saw shadows more often when I was really young, and they did terrify me a lot. But I can't even describe the full experience of this one night. I was maybe 13 or 14. I was awake past my bedtime, maybe 11 o'clock at night, but it could have been as late as 1 a.m. I had a light on next to my bed and I was listening to music and reading a book. At the time, I still used my closet and I'd left it open. I remember nothing about that day before this moment. It had been a completely normal day, nothing to note about it, but I'd been feeling a bit uneasy all night. I kind of felt like I'd been being watched and this was nothing new. I lived in a house, routinely which had spirits in it. I just did what I always did, which was try to distract myself from it. Reading a book. I was feeling really uneasy all of the sudden though, and I just looked up. And my closet was opposite of my bed. Directly opposite of my bed was actually the door out into the hallway, but about 6 feet to the left was my closet, which was built into the wall. My closet did make me uneasy on a normal night-to-night basis. It would feel like I would be watched from it, and I got into the habit of leaving it open so I can see that there wasn't anybody in there staring at me. Anyway, I looked up from my book and there was just this thing. I can't really describe it. I couldn't really see it. Like I could look at it, but I couldn't. Physically my eyes would point at it, but they wouldn't focus on it. But this thing was like black. And it wasn't really tall, but I could see these red eyes up by the ceiling. And I know that people say their fight or flight response gets triggered. I was kind of all of the sudden, beyond that. I kind of locked eyes with this thing. I wanted to run away. But I couldn't. My fight or flight response was actually to freeze. And when that initial moment passed, it's kind of like, this thing looks like some kind of predator, waiting for me to move, so I shouldn't move, and if I did, in order to go anywhere, I have to go toward it so. Either way, I stared at this thing. Once I locked eyes with it, it was kind of like the only thing I could see. I knew it was climbing down from the top of my closet. It crawled across my floor and kind of disappeared behind my bed underneath my bed. I didn't ever see that thing again. But I didn't look away from where it had disappeared. It was probably an hour before the pain in my shoulders from not moving was too much for me to stay like that, and so I grabbed my sheets and pulled them all up around me, wrapped myself really tightly in them, and put my back to the wall and just stood guard. Have no other way to describe it than just waiting, watching. I just had to make sure that thing wasn't about to crawl out from under my bed. I had no protection from paranormal entities or physical entities. And it wasn't until the sun started to rise and there was sunlight coming in my room that I started to feel in any way like the thing had moved on. It wasn't until my mom had actually gotten up to get ready for work that I just very slowly shut off my light and slowly laid down. I know I went to the doctor that day because I was in shock and literally just stared at my closet until my mom made me get up and go with her. What happened after that, I don't really remember. My parents kept a very close eye on me for a while. They didn't really know how to help me. They had no idea that I'd been going through so much paranormal activity for a long time. They knew about it when I was really young, but they taught me that it wasn't like okay and I should hide it, so I did. I have never left a closet door open since. And I didn't use any closet for about 4 years after that. We moved out of that house when I was 18. I've lived in about 8 different locations since then. Only one ever felt haunted to me after that. Even so, nothing has ever felt as terrifying since then or as completely insane. I can't even. In my old house, we noticed not long after we'd moved in that it was actually haunted. My mother, sister and I had all experienced some scary things, but this is one I'll never forget. I was home alone one day, sister at school, mom at work. I was basically pacing around the house doing things with my earphones in. By this time, I was standing between the side of my kitchen bench and the back of the lounge, kind of at the end of the hallway. I guess I decided to turn around at that exact moment, like straight on. I saw this black figure floating about 5 inches above the ground looking at me from the other side. I must have blinked fairly hard, thinking I was just seeing things, but when I opened my eyes, it got closer. Now I think this is where the anxiety kicked in, and I guess that made me freak out. My breathing quickly increased and as I blinked more, it kept getting closer till it got a decent distance to my face and immediately disappeared. I felt an awful sense of dread and I grabbed my pets, closed the house up and sat outside until somebody got home. All of this happened in the span of about 4 seconds, but it was clear as day and still is in my mind. I was in a basement that I was renting from my girlfriend's mom. I was 18 years old, stone cold sober, wide awake, when I heard what I thought was the toilet running. You know that weird little sound a toilet makes when it's flushed, but the plug in the tank doesn't close afterwards and therefore runs continuously until closed manually. Anyways, I find it strange that I'd be hearing that at 9 to 10 p.m. when no one was home, not to mention the fact that I hadn't used the restroom any time recently. Surely enough, upon checking the tank, it was running, and so I closed it and carried on reading a book on my bed in the next room over with my door cracked as usual. Now after maybe a minute or two, the sound begins again. Basically the same as it had before, but this time upon checking, the tank was full of water, and once in the restroom, the noise had stopped. Confused, I went back to my room to read. After the exact same scenario repeating itself twice more, I decided to turn off my fan, check every window in the basement, and even close the vents in my room and the restroom. Now with my full attention to the room and in complete silence, the sound begins again. This time particularly defined and of course, pretty creepy. I should mention that this house was touted as a pretty haunted house by my girlfriend's family at the time, but after being familiar with the paranormal my whole life prior to living there, I didn't think much of it. They told some pretty extreme stories about the place when I was moving in, but I was just thankful to have a place to live for cheap. I was also there already for about a week at the time, with no incident leading up to this. Anyway, back to the craziness. So now with a confirmed clear and disturbingly subtle communication of some sort, I playfully utter the words, "I've got no beef with the spirit realm, take it easy on me. I scare easily." The sound then stops briefly, only to start again seconds later. Now I'm genuinely terrified and in a bit of a reactionary state, perhaps the fight or flight stage of panic. I hop out of bed, phone flashlight in hand, and shuffle out into the basement living room in an athletic broad-based stance. In my heart, I knew it was paranormal, but as a rational human, and like any cornered animal, I prepared myself for a fight. Whether it be an intruder or otherwise, I was doing my best to seem tough in the face of this perceived danger. This was a bluff of course, I was fleeing mortified. The basement living room light was conveniently burnt out, and I knew that, thus the phone flashlight. I can hear the running water sound, but it seemed to move away from me. Like it's farther and farther away as I slowly advance to a better vantage point. As I scan the dark basement living room with my light, I can feel the sense of dread and terror overtaking me. Now, after going right to left with the light, I expose the farthest left corner and also darkest part of the room with light, and just as I do, the faint running water sound becomes an unintelligible series of gibberishy type whispers, if you will. Multiple voices, in a language I couldn't understand, and most importantly, in a much higher volume now. Like as if it went from whispers on a phone speaker to whispers in a car's sound system. The noise was deafening and instantly all around me. Simultaneously, this chilling cold gust of wind seemed to travel through my body as I stood there in shock. The force of this gust, coupled with the feeling of having my body plopped into an ice bath, basically buckled my knees into a deep squat. I was devastated but recovered almost instantly, only to whimper like a child and sprint up the stairs and out of the house in my socks. I waited in the street for a ride and only returned when people were home. I'd had some pretty intense experiences before and after that, but this one is almost too tangibly real for me to question. The back and forth and subsequent show of force by that entity was just too much to speculate about or try to debunk. Absolutely chilling to reminisce about. I have a couple of stories to post, like living in a haunted dark room 1800s house that felt evil. Another house early 1900s with an evil presence, light turns on etc. But this story was the most real thing that my eyes have ever saw. It's short and to the point, but this thread is your most real paranormal experience, and I'm not sure if this counts as paranormal, but here it is. The days leading up to my 21st birthday were the longest days of my life, and I wasn't sleeping much, maybe 4 hours a day for at least 10 days, and then the day came. I turned 21 at midnight. I already had an ID which said my birthday, so I was good to buy alcohol at midnight. Okay, no place is open so I have to go to the next town 40 minutes away that has a 24-hour CVS. Okay, here's the scary part. I entered this town and right before the exit, there is a green highway sign that says Los Angeles 500 miles north or something similar, and as I get off to the street light while going fast in my mom's car, I see what appears to be a 10 feet black shadow with wings moving. Literally a moving giant black shadow that appears to be an angel about 4 feet taller than a Honda SUV, if you know what I'm talking about, and it vanished in the blink of an eye. There 1 second, gone the next second. The shadow figure was alive and moving, and I watched it for 3 seconds. It was shaped like an angel, muscular pitch black alpha being, with huge wings standing 10 feet tall. This is what happened to me on the night of my 21st birthday. And I'll never forget what I saw. To this day, I know I will see that shadow again.